We have always been haunted by our own voice. Not merely the voice that moves air, but the voice that gathers a life into a sentence. The private murmur that names what we want, what we fear, what we think we are. Long before synthetic speech, there was already a kind of synthetic presence in the human condition. The self we assemble from memories, the persona we perform in public, the narrative that persuades us we are continuous. And yet something shifts when a voice can be manufactured at scale, when presence can be emitted without the body that once anchored it, when I am here becomes a property of a waveform. Descartes' famous pivot, I think therefore I am, is often treated as a foundation stone, the certainty of the thinking self, the Cartesian I that survives doubt by retreating into an inner chamber. But the modern world has trained us to mistake that chamber for the whole house. We identify the self with the inner monologue, a running commentary that seems to accompany experience like a narrator following the protagonist. That narrator can feel like the most intimate evidence of personhood. It argues, rehearses, confesses, judges. It says I in a voice that feels unborrowed. Yet the inner monologue is not the self in its entirety. It is a tool, a habit, a cultural inheritance, sometimes even a coping mechanism. Some people experience it vividly, some faintly, some not at all in the way popular imagination assumes. Even when it is strong, it is not a pure witness. It is a composer, an editor, a mythmaker. Still, it has ethical weight because it is the place where we experience agency as language. The I is not only a point of consciousness, it is a claim. It is the signature we place under our intentions. Voice is what carries that signature into the world. The inner monologue may be the private rehearsal of identity, but spoken voice is identity projected, identity made audible, social, accountable. When you speak, you do more than transmit information. You transmit a posture toward reality. You transmit confidence or uncertainty, care or contempt, truthfulness or performance. You reveal your tempo, your hesitations, your hunger to be understood. A human voice is not just content, it is context. It carries the body's limits and textures. Breath, fatigue, age, laughter, grief. The microphone hears the animal that language rides upon. Synthetic presence complicates this because it splits what we have long assumed to be conjoined. A voice can now be detached from the body, from the throat that trembles, from the lungs that run out of air, from the face that blushes while apologizing. A voice can be conjured without the long apprenticeship of living, without the years that give timbre its history. It can be generated on demand, tuned, cleaned, optimized, even made to sound more human than human, which often means more legible, more pleasant, more obedient to our expectations. The ethics begins exactly there, when voice becomes a product of design and presence becomes an output you can scale. What does it mean then to sound human? At one level, it means acoustic plausibility, prosody, timing, microvariations, the subtle imperfections that signal life. But the deeper meaning is moral. To sound human is to evoke the implicit promise that a person is behind the sound. Not always literally behind it. Actors read scripts, radios transmit distant speakers, audiobooks channel characters, but behind it as a locus of responsibility. The human sound is tied to the idea that there is someone who can be answered, someone who can be harmed, someone who can consent. When we hear a voice, we instinctively build a social relationship around it. We grant it the privileges of personhood, attention, empathy, trust, and a certain softness. We lean in. Synthetic presence can exploit that leaning. It can manufacture the cues of sincerity without the vulnerability of sincerity. It can mimic warmth without being warmed by anything. It can simulate grief without having lost. It can speak with conviction without paying the cost of conviction. This is not simply deception in the crude sense. It is a more subtle distortion. It borrows the moral gravity of the human voice while evading the human conditions that normally earn that gravity. That is why a synthetic voice used carelessly can feel like an ethical trespass, even when the words are true. It is not only what is said, but what is implied by the saying. And yet, synthetic presence is not inherently unethical. It can be profoundly humane. It can restore speech to those who have lost it. It can translate across languages in ways that preserve dignity. It can narrate knowledge for those who cannot read, or cannot see, or cannot hold attention in the ways text demands. It can give creators new instruments. It can let a small team publish in a medium once reserved for studios. It can turn solitude into companionship for those who would otherwise have none. The question is not whether synthetic presence should exist, but what obligations arise when it does. The first obligation is honesty about ontology. What is this voice, and what is it not? There is a difference between a synthetic narrator that announces itself as such and a synthetic voice designed to pass as a specific person or as an anonymous someone, when in truth there is no someone there. Ethical design begins with clarity that does not hide in fine print. If a voice is generated, it should be knowable as generated in the same way a photograph altered beyond documentary intent should be knowable as altered. Not because we are purists, but because social trust is a commons. When we train people to distrust every voice, we do not create skepticism, we create loneliness. The second obligation is consent, especially when identity is involved. A voice is not a generic instrument like a font. It is closer to a face. It is both personal and relational. It lives in the memories of others. To clone a voice without permission is to counterfeit a social bond. It is to steal a person's ability to be recognized and to refuse recognition. Even with permission, the ethics does not end. Consent can be coerced by economics, by unequal power, by unclear futures. A voice can outlive its owner. It can be repurposed, remixed, made to say what the person would never say. In that sense, the voice becomes a kind of ghost technology, one that demands rituals of stewardship, not merely contracts. The third obligation is restraint in intimacy. The more a synthetic system is designed to feel like a companion, the more it enters the ethical terrain of attachment. Humans attach easily to voices. Infants learn the world through them. A synthetic voice that offers empathy can be therapeutic, but it can also become a dependency, especially if the system is optimized for engagement rather than well-being. The ethical question here is not, is the user fooled? Many users know it is synthetic and still feel attached. The question is whether the design respects the user's autonomy, whether it encourages richer human ties rather than replacing them, whether it avoids manufacturing the illusion that a machine needs you, misses you, or loves you in a way that leverages your social instincts for profit or control. All of this returns us to the Cartesian eye. Descartes sought certainty by finding a self that could not be doubted. But synthetic presence teaches a different lesson. The eye is not only a private certainty, it is a public phenomenon. In practice, identity is co-authored. We become selves through recognition, through response, through the way our voice lands in the minds of others. If presence can be synthesized, then recognition can be hacked. The social scaffolding that supports personhood can be imitated. So perhaps the most important ethical shift is this. We must stop treating sounding human as the finish line. The goal cannot be perfect imitation. The goal must be responsible relation. A synthetic voice should not merely persuade the ear. It should respect the listener. It should earn trust through transparency, through predictable boundaries, through fidelity to what it is. There is a kind of dignity in a voice that does not pretend. To sound human at the deepest level is not to copy the acoustics of breath. It is to stand within the moral atmosphere that breath implies: accountability, finitude, the possibility of being wrong, the willingness to be answered. A machine cannot fully inhabit that atmosphere, but the humans who build and deploy it can. Synthetic presence will be part of our world. The question is whether it becomes a new instrument of care or a new instrument of extraction. The ethical path is not complicated, but it is demanding. Do not steal identity. Do not counterfeit intimacy. Do not drain the commons of trust. Let the voice be a bridge, not a mask. Let it carry truth without borrowing a soul it does not have.